Hi, how are you? Today, let's talk about indoctrination and unveil its essence. Schools are supposed to educate students by teaching them important facts and skills. However, schools are sometimes accused of indoctrinating students, for example, coercing them into believing religious views, sometimes failing to present widely accepted scientific facts, or promoting controversial moral or political views. Similar charges are often levied against parents, religious scholars, or politicians. But what is indoctrination anyway? Is it always bad? If so, why? Might some indoctrination be necessary or even good? In this video, let's discuss answers to some of these questions. First, let's look at what is indoctrination. Deciphering indoctrination can be divided in three parts. Number one, content, what is taught or advocated or told. Number two, method, how that is done. Number three, result, the outcome of teaching or advocacy. Let's look at the content first. This view holds that indoctrination differs from education when what is being taught is an ideology. An ideology is a worldview, a set of interlinked beliefs and rigid opinions about what the world is or should be like, which guides people's thinking and action. Ideologies include Marxism, humanism, Nazism, and liberal democracy, among other political and religious worldviews. Some people define ideology or as beliefs or ways of thinking which prevent the believer from accurately interpreting reality. According to this definition, ideologies are always epistemically bad as they interfere with getting knowledge and avoiding ignorance. But why do we think that teaching or advocating ideology is always indoctrination? One reason is that teaching people to believe ideologies might seem at variance with intellectual virtues such as open-mindedness, critical thinking, curiosity, and sensitivity to evidence. So the idea of education should be to cultivate intellectual virtue, to support beliefs with evidence. Ideological thinking, in contrast, leads people to believe that controversial beliefs, for example, the core doctrines, are indisputably true. They are proven facts without assessing the evidence. While intellectual virtues can help prevent one from forming false or unjustified beliefs, it doesn't mean that possessing intellectual virtues is a guarantee for true beliefs. Indoctrination fosters a hostile environment where it is very difficult to tell what's true and what's false. Thus, one might make lots of mistakes despite one's open mindedness, curiosity, and sensitivity to evidence. It's also counterintuitive to claim that indoctrination always involves teaching or advocating ideology. The trouble is that it's not always clear which ideologies are false or unfounded. Very reasonable people disagree about many religious and political ideologies, despite all of them being very reasonable. This makes the ideology theory unhelpful for distinguishing indoctrinating from educating. Number two, method. So, method to indoctrinate almost invariably involves bypassing rationality by getting people to believe things without enabling them to rationally evaluate the beliefs, where they can't inquire or challenge beliefs without the fear of rebuke or penalty. I consider it to be indoctrination where advocacy or instruction coerce the subjects into belief as opposed to allowing them to rationally evaluate the reasons for and against it for themselves. Most so called ideological grooming is nothing more than a paradox of indoctrination because it may require its subjects to hold beliefs rationally and open mindedly, but ask them to accept principles of reasoning methods that they either can't or shouldn't rationally evaluate. I will call it belief manipulation as a variant of indoctrination. Such type of indoctrination can equip its subjects with knowledge of how to defend their beliefs, even though they have formed their beliefs without questioning them. In this case, subjects are able to rationally engage with certain criticisms of their beliefs, but we are still inclined to say that they were indoctrinated. The most skillful indoctrinators will frequently appeal to chains of reasoning when teaching their beliefs. Religious or political indoctrination, for instance, will generally involve instructions in standard arguments that purport to debunk the incorrect reasoning on which heresies are based. Most instances of indoctrination occur in venues entered into voluntarily by those who become victims of indoctrination. In educational context, many argue that it might be good to sometimes bypass students' rationality. For example, to help students acquire critical thinking skills, teachers must first get them to accept certain principles of reasoning without challenging them, as debate can sometimes impede education. In principle, I'll tend to disagree because it can only happen when there is a debate, but at least one side of the debate approaches the topic from a highly misinformed position. And so, debating the issue can make that side appear more reasonable or evidence based than it really is. But yes, in educational contexts, discussing and debating when both sides are equally misinformed or controversial can mislead students and thereby disrupt education. Sometimes fostering both sides of a debate to undermine a universally accepted thing like Holocaust, climate change, partly true, partly wrong, effectiveness of vaccines, is an attempt to indoctrinate in disguise. You can't play both sides here. Why? Because this is incorrect when one side is not a reasonable, informed position. There's the presentation of different viewpoints as being equally reasonable or equally problematic when at least one of the viewpoints is misinformed and unreasonable and so should not be presented as a view for serious consideration or as a counter view, a counterbalance for the opposing view. This is referred to as both sides saying. This is enough discussion about the methods of indoctrination for you to be able to detect when you see one afoot. Now we come to the third part, which is outcome result. The outcome of indoctrination is dogmatism, which ignores or dismisses relevant challenges to what one believes. Dogmatism views any idea that count a relevant alternative to one's belief as philosophically controversial, whether or not it's objectively likely to be true. Consider terrorist instructors who teach their subjects that it's wrong to disbelieve what they are taught. Their teachings inculcate dogmatism among their subjects because they have strong reasons like the value of their own life or immorality of killing innocent people to consider other possibilities but are taught to ignore them. Similarly, some people choose to ignore all arguments for evolution, for vaccines, or for climate change. Now, before we sum up, let's briefly discuss the moral aspects of indoctrination. Accusing someone of indoctrination implies that they did something wrong, right? But is indoctrination always wrong? Well, it depends on what indoctrination is. There can be different ways in which the tendency to hold a belief without considering seriously the alternatives to it can be judged to be good or bad. If indoctrination is a matter of preaching ideology, it's wrong when it misleads people. Ideologies often give fixed answers to questions for which reasonable people can disagree, and those denying an ideology can be seen as unreasonable by some adherents of that ideology. Hence, platforming people with fixed positions on subjective matters is essentially to mislead them. There's also a possibility, theoretically, if at all, of good indoctrination. This type of indoctrination is innocuous because doing so otherwise gives them the false impression that it's part of a serious debate when it isn't. For example, teaching the challenges that flat earth conspiracy theorists raise against earth being round is a waste of time. Some beliefs are rightly accepted without considering the alternatives that some mistakenly take seriously. The evidence, the consensus are overwhelming. However, when indoctrination is a matter of getting people to believe something in a way that bypasses their rationality, this seems disrespectful. Because it's wrong to bypass someone's rationality when they can rationally evaluate the belief. So let's now sum it up. Indoctrination is a tricky subject with different layers. We have seen that. We have seen that it's not a simple black and white issue. First off, it depends on what's being taught. If it's some rigid ideology that doesn't encourage open-mindedness or critical thinking, then yeah, it is probably indoctrination, right? But here is the kicker. Figuring out which ideologies fall into that category can be a real brain teaser. People often don't agree on what is true or not, so it gets murky. Then there is the method. If someone is forcing you to believe something without letting you think it true, that's a red flag for indoctrination. Sure, there are times in education where you might need to skip the debate and just learn some basics, universally, incontrovertibly accepted, acknowledged facts. But if one side of the argument is straight up crazy, it's not so cool to pretend it's a valid point of view. What is indoctrination's end game? Usually it leads to dogmatism, where people ignore anything that challenges their beliefs. That's dangerous. Like we just discussed, when terrorists make their followers blindly believe without question, or when people deny things like climate change or vaccines or evolution without looking at the evidence. Morally, as we saw, indoctrination is a mixed bag. If it is pushing an ideology that misleads, it's wrong. But sometimes skipping the debate on certain issues is like Earth being flat, is just practical. Not everything deserves an equal platform. So here is the takeaway. Indoctrination isn't always crystal clear, but it's vital to stick to reason, evidence, and critical thinking. That's what matters. Stick to evidence, reason, critical thinking. When you come across wacky ideas that defy common sense, don't get sucked in. Call them out and keep your thinking caps on. Got it? Wonderful. Thank you very much for listening to this discussion, and we'll meet again.